In 2016, with a population of 23.13 million people, spread across 7.5 million square kilometres and 3 different time zones, Australia is a country, like many, that is faced with a variety of prominent social issues. These issues range from poverty to inequality to changing family life to the effects of the treatment of Indigenous Australians throughout Australia's first 200 years. With education and schools as a key institution in Australian society, prima facie, these issues arise in the classroom and need to be taken into account by teachers to ensure that students are learning in an effective environment. My name is Nicola O'Brien, and I am a first-year Masters of Teaching student with an undergraduate double degree in Arts and Law. In late 2014, my fourth year of study at an undergraduate level, I began working as a paralegal. 3 weeks into my role as a paralegal, I would come home continually frustrated and upset, although nothing negative had occurred. I was able to work out that I was frustrated that people could be so passionate about the law that they were willing to make their job their lifestyle, and that my passion did not match theirs. For me, I have always wanted to be a teacher, and hence in 2016 I began a Masters of Teaching secondary with History and Legal Studies as my subject areas. I am passionate about education because I am passionate about every child having the opportunity to be their best self. I believe that as a teacher I can and hopefully will be able to positively influence the lives of many children so that they themselves can find and follow their passions. I know that as a teacher, who is yet to undertake professional experience, I am going to come into a classroom that is made up of students who are from a variety of cultural backgrounds, differing family types, and different social classes. I myself am an Australian citizen with Irish and Scottish heritage that can be traced back to the First Fleet. I am from a nuclear family with my parents still married and one younger brother. In addition, I am from a middle-class family and attended a Catholic school in my local area. With this in mind, you may be asking why I have chosen to focus on social class and inequality, cultural difference and identity, and changes to family life in this presentation. The main reason is that the area I grew up in and still reside in is Roselands in Sydney Southwest. Within my locality, there is a representation of different social classes. I have previously been a swimming instructor at the local council-run swim school, and in this role came to a better understanding of the poverty and inequality that is present in my area. I feel strongly about social inequality because despite the obvious bias that many who grow up in poverty experience, especially with intergenerational poverty, I believe that through education, opportunities can be provided for those from low-income households to change their position or have the same access to jobs and opportunities as those who are better off. In addition, in my local government area, 17.9% of the population is Australian, 17.5% is Lebanese, 8.5% are Vietnamese, and 7.4% are Chinese. These are just the major countries of ancestry, with residents from over 100 nation-states residing in the area. The area is a centre for multiculturalism and cultural diversity. From my experience of living in a multicultural area, I am passionate about creating an inclusive classroom that allows for all students to understand and implement some aspects of other countries' cultures, as we live in a world that has never before been so connected, especially by information and communication technology. In choosing a third key issue to focus on, I decided that the changing nature of family life was an issue that could tie in with the two aforementioned issues, and that could be used to highlight the impact of ICT in the classroom, and gives me the opportunity to explore Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. One major social issue that I have not touched on is rural education. Whilst I believe this is a fascinating issue, it is not an issue that I have had exposure to yet in a personal or professional capacity, and therefore have made the decision to focus on other areas. Looking now to my first area, social class and inequality. Social class is the organisation of society into groupings of persons who have similar economic and social power. Social classes are arranged in a hierarchy, and therefore there are unequal relationships between each class. Post-colonial society has been labelled a meritocratic society, that is, a society where citizens progress based on their talent and ability, as opposed to class privilege or wealth. Hence, if Australia is meritocratic, one may ask why social class is relevant. However, a meritocratic society does not hide social structures or prevent policies from being implemented that create class inequalities, and hence, social class is of immense relevance in Australia. Prior to World War II, this notion of a meritocratic society was reflected in schools, which saw talented and hard-working children advance through school despite their economic circumstances. However, it must be noted that within schools, despite the meritocracy, social stratification was reinforced through standardized testing. After World War II, in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a focus on education and an increase in funding which saw opportunities to rectify inequalities and disadvantage. When examining social class and inequality in relation to education, it is important to look to social class theorists. Initially, Karl Marx argued that social classes were formed on the basis of people's relationship to labour and whether they owned capital. This was the working class against the capitalist class. Two 20th century theorists that stood out to me and resonated with me were Bourdieu and Bernstein. Bourdieu argued that social stratification does not merely occur through economic circumstance, but that class power is an accumulation of interrelated resources of cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. Bourdieu's theory resonates with me and what I aim to do in my career as a teacher. That is, give students a social and cultural capital through education to allow them to maximize their opportunities despite their social class or the wealth inequality they may be experiencing. Conversely, looking at Bernstein, it is important to acknowledge that educational codes are embedded within schools' curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment systems. For example, more value is placed on chemistry than food technology, and hence, this can often work to reinforce social class. It has been said that when we think about how deep-rooted inequality is in society, society is in danger of seeing inequality as inevitable and social mobility as an impossibility. However, as we have seen, and as I believe, inequality is not a natural phenomenon, but rather tied to processes and social structures. As a teacher, understanding this and taking this into consideration means that I will be able to recognize and navigate the effects of inequality in the classroom. I, as a teacher, believe that I will be able to influence the lives of my students through effective pedagogy, addressing power and inequality in the classroom, and mostly by recognizing and valuing the diverse cultural capital of my students. Where social inequality looks to the different and diverse economic capital that will make up the classroom, in the same way, the classroom will be diverse with students from differing cultural backgrounds and identities. This area is a passion of mine as I have grown up and still reside in a very multicultural area that I believe flourishes because of the wide variety of cultural identities that make up the local government area. With over 24% of Australians born overseas, Australia is viewed as a multicultural nation, and education is a site of powerful cultural transmission. Let's have a quick look at the policies that have been implemented in Australia's history regarding immigration. From the 1880s onwards, the White Australia policy was enshrined by the Immigration Restriction Act 1901, which was implemented and persisted until the 1960s. This allowed immigrants from the UK and other European countries only. Assimilation was the policy that followed. Assimilation was a policy in the 1950s and 60s that continued with the White Australia policy. Migrants were to blend in, learn to speak English, and accept Australian customs. Little was done to assist migrants of non-English speaking backgrounds, and problems arose for migrants. For example, being labelled by the Immigration Minister Colwell New Australians. In 1966, the Division of Assimilation within the Department of Immigration was renamed the Division of Integration. The policy of integration was adopted. Integration was migrants being allowed to maintain their national identity whilst becoming part of a greater Australia. Culturally based organisations were formed to provide support to migrants. Foreign language programs were broadcast on SBS radio and television. Integration was the start of the erosion of the White Australia policy, which gave way to multiculturalism. In 1970, the Australian government accepted multiculturalism as an official policy. Multiculturalism celebrates cultural diversity, whilst encouraging migrants to maintain their culture, but still respect others and obey Australian laws. Migrants weren't selected on race or nationality. Migrants could apply for citizenship 3 years after residency, and migration was open to Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. By the late 1970s, 30% of Australian migrants stemmed from the Asia Pacific. Education is a key agent of change with particular regard to multiculturalism. Schools and the classroom can foster values of multiculturalism amongst young children and young adults. Not only is multiculturalism a policy within schools, but is now a value. A common principle, which is a staple of mission statements in schools, is cultural diversity. As cultural diversity is dynamic and enriching, something that all citizens benefit from. Schools play a key role in the promotion of respect for this cultural diversity. The necessity of cultural diversity in multiculturalism schools is elucidated by the statistic that around 90% of young Muslim Australians attend their local state school. Differing ethnic backgrounds in the classroom does not only extend to migrants, but also to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. If we look at the theorist Vygotsky argues that language is a cultural tool that socializes young children and influences the way that children think about the world. Hence, a teacher can convey respect for a student's ethnic identity and culture by supporting a student's first language. This is applicable to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, where English may be their second, third, or even fourth dialect. So why is the aforementioned information regarding cultural difference and identity important to me? It is known that a variety of cultural groups fit very well within the classroom in Australia, and an above snapshot of my local government area's cultural composition shows that a culturally diverse classroom is an inevitability for teachers. The multicultural composition of Australian schools results in the need for multicultural education, comprising of content integration, equity pedagogy, and empowering school culture, knowledge construction, and prejudice reduction must be taught by all teachers. Again, this is largely applicable to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. A national numeracy review in 2008 outlined many features that led to success at school for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. These features include that culture was valued by teachers and school communities, skills and strengths that Indigenous students bring are nurtured, and that Indigenous educators are used to bridge the gap between school and a student's community. It is these strategies that I, as a beginning teacher, need to consider and look to implement to overcome the challenges of catering to a classroom with diverse backgrounds, and to ensure that my classroom is culturally rich and that full advantage is taken of what the students can teach each other and the teacher about different cultures in a multicultural classroom. Tying in with social inequality and cultural differences is the impact that the composition of a student's family can have in the classroom. For most children, a family is their first educational institution. It is important to look at the historical development of the family to better understand the types of families that students in the classroom may come from. Prior to colonisation, when Australia was a hunter-gatherer society, children were an early part of the labour force. The family was a production centre and a vocational education centre at the same time. As society moved away from hunter-gatherer societies, the families lost more production-based tasks and gained more emotional tasks. For example, a married couple is more often than not linked by deep affection, not practical arrangement centered around work and property. Society then moved to the nuclear family, with the wife as the housewife and husband who went out and provided for family in a market economy. German sociologist Mies argues that this pattern is closely associated with modern capitalism and was spread around by colonialism and the international capitalist economy. However, today, if we look at contemporary Australia, it is clear that married, mum, dad and the kids' families, as seen in washing powder advertisements and in the photo above, make up only a minority of actual households. In the Australian Bureau of Statistics 2009 survey, Family Characteristics Australia, it was found that 8.4 million households in Australia. There were 6.2 million family households, and among those, just 1.9 million intact couple families. There are many households today. There are people who live alone, unmarried couples with children, one-parent families, lesbian and gay couples, heterosexual couples without children, extended families, group households, blended families with children, and so on. With the family as such an imperative stakeholder in a child's education, as a teacher, identifying and recognizing the different families that make up the classroom will be of utmost importance. Some parents may be lesbian or gay, and lesbian and gay families also exist. Rural families face different economic problems from city families. Indigenous families often have the resource of strong kinship ties, but at the same time have to deal with poverty, racism, and loss of land. Even the conjugal family changes, with historically high rates of separation, divorce, and remarriage. Many households that began as traditional families have now been reorganized as blended families. The same Australian Bureau of Statistics Family Characteristics Survey found that 3% of all families with children were blended families. Tying this issue back with social class, we can look at families who are in poverty, who would be under significant stress. On average, they have worse health and housing, they may be forced to move, they are less likely to have good quality meals and medical care, they have fewer consumer goods that their peer groups value, and they find it more difficult to form constructive relationships at school. Affluent families have the social authority and economic resources that poor families do not. Affluent families often have had university education, and parents, if they wish, can buy an education for their children through the private school system. Their children grow up in a more well-resourced environment. So what is the impact of family life for teachers like me in the classroom? I will need to adapt pedagogy for children from a variety of families, which should go a long way to effective learning in the classroom. Today, schools and myself as a pre-service teacher will need to be more conscious of the relationship with families and implement guidelines to encourage parent involvement. Schools may have programs where parents help with reading, sporting events, or excursions, as relationships with families are usually the most important element of a child's emotional world. I as a teacher will endeavour to take into account the different families present in my classroom and develop relationships with families to ensure that every student in my classroom can maximise their potential. I know that as a teacher who is yet to undertake professional experience, I'm going to come into a classroom that is made up of students who are from different cultural backgrounds, differing family types, and from a variety of social classes. I believe that recognizing the social inequality, variety of cultural backgrounds, and differing family types, and developing effective pedagogy to account for these, will help all my students in the classroom succeed.